Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, with all of the talk about the relative disappointment of Season 3 for Diablo 4, and then the quick turnaround to just the absolute hype and general revival of the player base in Season 4 of the game, with player retention out of the roof even 3 weeks in, and all of that has just sort of distracted from an extremely major thing that will be going on far sooner than you might realize. The first expansion for Diablo 4, named Vessel of Hatred, was announced at BlizzCon last year with the promise of being released this year. As we know, there are general plans for yearly expansions as well. As of right now, we are in June and Season 4 has impressed most players quite a lot, but we currently have 6 months left at absolute maximum before this expansion comes out, with all likelihood being November at this point around Season 6. So let's just sit down and wrap up everything that we know so far about Diablo 4's Vessel of Hatred expansion, especially with the Xbox Games Showcase coming up imminently, and the relatively high chance of us getting some pretty major news about this. So today, let's go over everything that we already know about the expansion from the official sources at Blizzard themselves, and then of course also some data mines and leaks, which generally I will be leaving towards the end of the video just to separate it for people who only want the official stuff, but just to sort of pique your interest, there were actually some minor leaks about a month ago indicating that at that point, suspiciously right in the middle of the PTR for Season 4, almost like it was a smokescreen, a distraction, during this point, a patch was spotted on one of the hidden developer side server branches, specifically the one for the expansion, which was previously in alpha stage, got an update and essentially entered its beta phase, meaning it is mostly complete at this stage. Just these sort of rougher edges smoothing around and the final additions to be made, lots of bugs to be fixed. That said, let's dive into it first up with the official information, most of which from BlizzCon itself from November, but also little bits and pieces that have been added here or there in various interviews along the way. First things then, overall expansion, Vessel of Hatred is focused around Mephisto's corruption of Neyrelle, and will continue directly on from the end of the main campaign from the base game of Diablo 4. It will follow us as we head south from our current playable slice of Sanctuary into Nahantu, formerly known as Torajan, a beautiful, lush jungle region filled with all kinds of fierce creatures, natural or otherwise, and at the center of this region will be the sprawling city of Kurast. These areas were part of Diablo 2, but the story of that game took place over 70 years ago, so even for those who have seen them in the past, things are going to be very different. Well, still promising some Easter eggs and special nods for those who've been there before, of course. Past that, then, we know there will be a brand new class to the Diablo 4 universe added with the expansion, the 6th class for the game, and funnily enough, since the time of this announcement, a full new class has been added to Diablo Immortal, the mobile game, which lets us cross those off the list of potential options. So basically, we know the new class won't be anything from an adjacent Diablo game, so no Witch Doctor, though it will still supposedly be in keeping with the general jungle theme of the expansion itself, which is interesting to see what they will come up with without stepping on the toes of something like the Druid, for example. That said, there are some potential leaks in relation to this if you are interested, but again, I'm keeping the leaks a bit separate. Past that, the only other thing that we know for sure is that we are having a much deeper dive on the expansion happening sooner rather than later, with the vague timeline that we were given on announcements being quote-unquote around 6 months, and that was said, well, 8 months ago. Now, assuming the PTR and major changes for Season 4 definitely would have pushed this back a bit, we are still, though, in the expected range for this to happen pretty much at any point. Summer Games Fest is going on, they just had all their announcements yesterday, and no showing from Blizzard at all. But there is the Xbox Games Showcase happening extremely soon, and given the whole early summer prediction for larger news timing, this feels like the last likely position for such a drop before something like Gamescom all the way in August, and this does line up with a potential November release for the expansion, so it all sort of adds up and makes sense. That said, with everything official out of the way, let's dive into the leaks. Aside from the one that I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, there was one very major potential leak done through data mining, and this one actually happened before the expansion was even announced to begin with. And while at first it was a bit shaky whether it was believable or not, enough of it has been proven to be accurate from the initial reveal of the expansion that it's hard not to at least be interested in this. There was data mining done on what was essentially the alpha version of the expansion, which we did talk about before. Blizzard had this running on their private dev side servers, and to put it simply, they predicted the name of the expansion through this leak, the area that it takes place within, and a number of smaller details that would be harder to get right. So while it should be taken with a massive grain of salt, sure, as even believable leaks are still leaks, they are subject to change, even if they are true, which there's no way of guaranteeing, there is still some definite reasonable possibility that this one is correct. That said, the main leaks from this that are still up in the air for consideration, unconfirmed, are the class itself itself, which would be called the spiritborn. There are a number of files related to skill abilities that were found, which contain tags such as nature, wings, and soaring. These tags are used in other classes with things like defense skills, wrath skills, etc. with the other classes, and obviously tags like that are subject to change, but the implications are what count. With nature probably just being things like storm and earth magic from Druid, things like that, possibly a different part of nature magic, like more plant type stuff than what Druid has access to, and then the wings and soaring implies some sort of flying movement shenanigans, possibly even moves that can only be used while in the air from said flying movement. Interesting concepts if it's true, for sure. Generally speaking, the theory around this class is it would be a sort of spirit walker, tied more to nature in a shamanic sense than a druid would be, more about the spirit of the enemies, and I know that's a crazy thing to say because Druid's resource is literally called spirit, but what are we going to do? We're talking about if this is true. The other main things then are a mercenary system defined by the concept of followers, multiple different ones you can choose between and customize to come with us on your journey permanently with their own equipment and talent trees, which becomes far more believable after Season 3's entire theme being a construct AI companion. I could totally believe was actually just a test run for a feature for the expansion, especially with all of the further minion changes that were made in Season 4 in general. Then there is a sort of combo here, raids possibly coming to the game as a concept, and Travancore mentioned in the files. Travancore being a sort of religious city of pyramids and ruins, which would theoretically make it the perfect sprawling, deep and impactful location for a raid type activity. What a raid means in Diablo terms, we have no idea, obviously. The immediate comparison would be things like raids in MMORPGs, but that would be a very odd concept for a Diablo game. So logically, it would likely be some sort of larger dungeon-like activity, but multiple stages, multiple bosses, different levels between, sort of like a really big Capstone dungeon, I think would be the best comparison to what we currently have. Difficult combat, special rewards, but actually endgame focused. And we got very little info on this concept other than that, so there's not a whole lot to dive into. Then the final thing that came up was a mechanic called Runestones. This could have been in relation to Season 3 though, as this alpha server was running before Season 3 came out, and they could have been testing things on there, and it could have even potentially been the glyphs that we had in constructs for that season mechanic, as glyph and runestone are similar enough words that it could have just been changed after the leak quite easily. But if that's not the case, and runestones is something expansion related, this would likely be some sort of way to add power to builds outside of our current means, maybe even something specifically related to the raid system, as we know that the developers want the game to still be playable with or without the expansion for every player, seasonal or otherwise, so you can still take part in all the content outside of the expansion specifically. And part of that is making sure that everything added with the expansion is either not locked behind the purchase or is self-contained enough that the game functions, even seasoned things, without having the expansion in the first place. So I could see a raid-specific power-up existing if raids were in fact a thing coming to the game. That said, all this stuff should be taken with a really big grain of salt, but they do have a bit of a track record of getting things right about the expansion in the same post, which does make it hard to ignore these things. Past that, what I do want to say is just, I think that we should give them a chance here with this, at least until we have the more information. The stuff that we have is very vague, and while thoughts on Diablo 4 were, you know, sort of back and forth. The season's bad, then great, then bad, and then great. And then theoretically that means the next one will be bad, but in all likelihood we'll have the expansion with Season 6, which would be a good season. Hopefully Season 5 isn't bad and we don't stick to this track record, but you get the idea of what I'm sort of saying here. When the announcement happened, we didn't know how the game was going to look outside of it before it actually released. At this point, we have Season 4, which is a massive rework to the game, and it will be the basis of the expansion, and it does honestly make me a little bit more excited to see what the expansion has to give us. We don't know. That's pretty much it, honestly, and that pretty much does it for now then, everyone. Just everything that we know about the Vessel of Hatred expansion for Diablo 4 up to this point, with larger information dumps and hopefully trailers set to be coming up within the next month or two. What are your own thoughts on all this then? Do you think that the leaks have any validity to them? And if so, do you like the concepts in them, as vague as they may be? Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.